For those of you that want to follow along, I'm going to start a new project here in a little bit to do a couple of things, demo that email that I sent out to you about how to use one of these newfangled Android Studio projects and turn it look a little bit more like the old ones. Having done a little research, that may not be a great idea, but considering where we are and the time frame that we have, we'll go with that for right now, and in the future you can take a look at some of those toolbar things that they're starting us out with and how those apply. But you can take a look at those at a different point. I want to remind you that on Saturday mornings I'm available to you, 9 to 12. Sherry can tell you I'm somewhat attentive, especially when she's the only one here. There was one person here. All right. So if you're behind, if you need help, if you need motivation, maybe that's the time to try to get yourself out of bed and come in and work, at least with me in the neighborhood, so if you get stuck, you can get some help. I know it's a tough time of day, but I wasn't about to do it at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. That's too tough for me. So, but that opportunity exists, so please take advantage of it if you see fit. If you plan to come, please let me know. Just send me an email, because if I get none, I might choose to stay behind because there will be somebody else here this Saturday for everybody else. But I just want to keep a head count too, so I will be here. As my email said, I do want to change gears just slightly. In Unit 6, there's some stuff at the end of the unit that talks about how to use a view flipper. If you want to try one of those and implement it in your Unit 6 Part 2, you can. But what I also had time to do this weekend was to finish my Unit 6 Part 2 key, and to need a view flipper. And there's also a small section in there about how to create different layouts. Some of your layouts for Unit 6 Part 2, when you rotate the screen, you may not see much text underneath that picture depending on how big your pictures are. Well, maybe having a separate layout where the text is on the side when you're horizontal versus on the bottom when you're vertical would be a way to change that. If you're interested in trying some of that stuff, it's in the notes. I'm not going to cover it here. If you implement either one of those, I'll find a way to get you some bonus points when you turn in Part 2 of Unit 6. I also flipped around some of my topics here. I used to have dialog views and private files. I'm trying to figure out whether I want to retain those or not. The difference between private files and the text files that we created is that they're only available to the user. They're not out there someplace to read. They're very similar. I don't know if I'm going to go there or not. To me, given the time limits that we have, what I really want to do is get into list views, and then list views will very quickly flow into multi-activity apps. So what I'm talking about with multi-activity is multiple screens. Not that you're flipping within one activity, but multiple activities with different purposes. How do we communicate back and forth? Very similar to the multiple screen type of stuff we were doing in Visual Studio. And so this is really what I'm shooting for. If I can get to that, that would be nice, but I think if we can get through list views and multi-activity apps by the end of the semester, that'll be quite a process. Tempted to give you the same assignment I gave students 2 years ago when I taught this class, and that's to have your loan application, if you will, some kind of form on one screen and a list on the other, which is very similar to what we did in Programming Logic Intermediate, where we had a list box on the left-hand side of the screen. You clicked on something, the details showed up over here. We can do the same kind of thing, including all the validation, including editing, including adding, including deleting. Can do that same kind of thing here. I don't know if I want to go quite that far because that was a pretty heavy app by the time we were done. We might find some, I might find some middle ground there. But my goal again is to get through these next 2 units, and I won't say we're going through 2 units a week or a week per unit. I think that's going to slow down here with list views and some of the other things that are in there. But we got about 5 weeks, 6 weeks left. And so if we get along and get through this multi-activities apps demo pretty quickly, I might give you a serious project to fight with and struggle with to make sure you're well occupied the last couple of weeks. And no, I'm still not planning on having a test in this class. So let's jump in. What I want to talk about here is just give an overview, first of all, is list views. The list view is just like that data grid that we saw in Programming Logic Intermediate. It's an opportunity for you to list things. And what a list view does in Android, it's very, very intelligent and very, very memory efficient, is it only displays as many items as you have room for on the screen, plus another one or two below and above. So as you're flinging through this list, it brings those in, but then it tacks more on the end. And it's only ever got whatever you have room for on the screen, plus one or two records. And it's amazing to me, and my iOS instructor, iOS does basically the same thing, but my iOS instructor demonstrated how many items were on that list. And he's flinging through, and in the debug bar, he's showing a list of how many are actually on the screen at any given time. And it never changed. He's flinging. They're flying by 100 at a time, and there was never more than 15 items on the screen at any given time. So these objects, this list view object, the code is written for it, is already very, very efficient. And the good news for us is we don't have to worry about it. We can give it a list of 100,000 items, link it to the list view, and go fling, and it takes care of showing you 10, 15 of those 100,000 at a time and which ones are where. Very nice for us. Okay. I do believe, and what do we use them for? Well, you saw we have lists of students, we have lists of DVDs. If you run your applications or if you use your Android device, your email list is actually a list of, it could be a list view. There are other ways to do it, but it could be a list view, your contacts list, even your settings window, and I don't have an app running here yet, so I will in a second. Even your settings window is nothing more than a complicated version of a list view. Here's your settings. Which one do you want to mess with? Here's a list of settings. Which one do you want to mess with? You click one, it goes off to the side, and now you're in a different activity. Change those settings. When you're done, you come back. It's kind of where I want to guide you here. Once we talk about list views, however, I do want to talk briefly about a spinner, which is Android Studio's version of a combo box. Takes up a little more room than a combo box, unfortunately. But talk about a spinner because it behaves very much the same. There's only a few items on the screen at any given time, but you kind of spin through them all, roll through them. And then finally, we'll take a quick look at an autocomplete text view so that you can see how to do that. Create a text box, and when you type in it, a list shows up. You want one of these typically defined or used things. Those are examples. I'm not going to talk about grid views. Grid views, when you launch an Android device, you see all these icons popped across the screen. Well, that's a list view, but it goes sideways and across, and it uses icons instead. And a gallery is very similar to that. So when you're looking at your photos in an Android device, you might see little going across the screen, little icons that represent each one of your photos. So they're actually also based on list views. You can still fling through them, but they use icons instead of text. We won't be talking about those. If you're interested in those, I think my Android intermediate notes talk about them briefly. Okay. One other just conceptual thing to get out of the way here is we're also going to learn about a new class called the ArrayAdapter class. The ArrayAdapter allows us to adapt arrays, which includes list arrays, to a list view. It kind of sits in between. And it has a way of communicating with that list view, so when the list view says, hurry up, he's flinging, give me a couple of more, it does it quickly versus trying to pull it out of an array. And so we'll learn how to use the ArrayAdapter, but think of it as a go-between, a translator, if you will, between our array list that has a list of everything that we want in that list view, and could be tens of thousands of items, and that list view itself that's only displaying 10, 15, maybe 100 if you've got a big tablet or something at a time. So it's in between. This line here, list views are so common I forgot to erase it. Android provides a list activity. I could not get the list activity to work anymore. I think it's going away because it's a little more limiting. Instead of having a regular activity, it's a list activity that is nothing but one of these lists. And sometimes that makes sense, but I couldn't get it in the time that I had. I couldn't get it to work in Android Studio. This is based on Eclipse. But that shouldn't matter because the list activity is there. The class is still there. I just couldn't get it to communicate effectively on my sample project. So we won't be talking about list activities, which is different than a list view. A list view is a view. It's just a widget that we'll use to throw on the form that we can scroll through a list. A list activity is a whole page that is nothing but a list view. And it used to some extent, some very minor extent, simplify processing. But it was pretty minor, so I don't mind leaving it out. I think I got rid of it every place else. So let's create a new app here. If you want to follow along and create a new Android Studio project, please. And I'm going to call this my ListView sample. We'll stick with the phone. We'll stick with API 17. Next. And I'll stick with the blank activity. Next. And you may have noticed in chapters 29, and you'll see it again in chapter 30, that the author of that book is now starting to change the names of these activities. That's fine. You may change them. For instance, here's the title on my main activity. You might change these, and if you do, some of the other ones change. But as we get into the next unit where we talk about multi-activity apps, then changing these names makes a little more sense. But even there's a main activity. I like the fact that the author is showing you can change the name of this. It doesn't have to be called main activity. Call it whatever you want. But as we get into a more multi-activity environment, having a main one is pretty common. So that first one that I create is always called main activity anyways. So I'm going to finish there. Wait for that to come up. And I'm going to, while that's loading, I'm going to pause the recording and also launch the emulator so that we don't have to watch that under recording. Nothing exciting here, but I did finally figure out how to get rid of this pink guy here and how to get this menu to stick so that it stays the same way after we did all of the playing around with this. And to get this, I think is John, was it John or Andy or somebody, I forget who said, can you make it look like yours? It was Tyler. Was it yours, Tyler? Said I want to get it to look a little more like yours. And so I've been fighting with this, and finally this afternoon I think I got it to work, so let me guide you through that process. So what I want to do is get rid of this pink thing, but when I get rid of the pink thing, then the menu gets a little funky. And when the menu gets funky, then that kind of messes up our lab 5 and 6, and the title bar goes away and weird things happen. So how do we get it back together again? I did send this to you in an email, so hopefully I can remember how to do all these things. This may not be in the same order they are in the email, but I'm going to get at them here anyways. First thing I'm going to do is switch to the activity main. Sequence here probably doesn't make a lot of difference. My notes say switch to text view. And inside here is a bunch of stuff we don't need, particularly this app bar layout. It's got a toolbar. So my notes say take out that entire tag, and I want to demonstrate this because most of you, all of you at this stage are probably HTML smart. And you know that a tag starts with one name and then you see it again with a slash in front of it, right? Same thing in XML. XML is simply a tool that allows us to store data, records of data, in a way that in pure text data. Very similar to HTML. Same kind of syntax. So I don't want this. That goes away. And I also don't want this floating action button bar. But I do want to tell you that then when I went to the documentation for a regular menu, it said, maybe in the future you want to stay away from those and use one of these floating action bars because that's kind of where Android is going as devices particularly get a little bigger. But I'm not ready for that yet. So I'm going to pull that guy out too, and that's a single-sided tag, so there is no end tag on that one, but you want to wipe out the ho tag. And then all that's left is a statement that says bring in whatever's in main. It's an include statement. Just like, I probably haven't learned it yet in HTML, but it's coming. Go out, find me an HTML file and suck it in. It's basically what this is saying. Go out and find me this XML file and suck it in. We could remove that. I think I did this once upon a time. Remove that and then paste whatever is that. Nah, just leave it there. It's fine. Then I want to switch back to content main. And notice things have already changed. But now my toolbar is gone. And I want to go to text view there as well. And take out any stuff that I don't need. And the one that was causing me rendering errors when I switched a little later, the one that was causing me rendering errors is this one. The show in. Now that's just a property, so you want to make sure you just get that much and not the rest of it, because that will cause trouble. So you want to take out the show in property and then switch back to design mode. And my advice is, notice there's a no action bar style. Switch that back to our trusty dusty holo light. And now it looks just like the one we had before. Except for one thing, when you run it, it doesn't show up that way in the emulator. Because there are some things that are happening in code behind the scenes that we still haven't cleaned up. Next, I believe we need to go to the main activity. Because there's some code in there that says give me a toolbar and stuff. All we're going to do here is take out everything except the first two lines. Those two I want to keep. Those are standard. Can't mess with them. Take everything else out. Be careful you don't go too far and take out that curly bracket, because that's the end of onCreate. This should look familiar. It's the onCreate that we saw at the beginning of the semester. Then there's a little tweak in the manifests file. So I'm going to open that one up. And the tweak here is the activity theme. Notice there's two themes. There's one here. And then there's an activity has a theme. So this is the theme for the entire application. This is the theme for the activity. This causes trouble. So I'm going to take that line out. Now here you're going to be careful. There's an end tag there. We are inside this activity tag. You want to make sure you leave your end curly bracket. That's really all we need to do there. And then finally, if I run this now, I'm going to run it. Hopefully it won't take too long. We should see it in the emulator. It's still going to come up blue. Even though the preview on the screen was gray, it's still going to come up blue. But everything is there. There's my menu with its settings that some of you forgot to delete, and there's my title and all that stuff. But it's blue. Where can we change that? Easy enough to do. Go into the values. Under values, we'll find colors. And under colors are the primary color, and these are referring to the title bar, as far as I can tell. The primary color is the action bar itself. But then at the top of the screen, there's another bar that is also a slightly different shade of blue here. You can change that as well. That is the color primary dark. This one's red. I have no idea where it's used right now. So you don't really need to change that one. But if we wanted this to go back to a shade of gray, you can now use your HTML color definition skills that you obviously have learned by now in HTML class. What does a gray look like? Anybody give me a clue? Oh. All three colors have the same weight. RGB are all the same. You pick a number. And my notes describe this. I'm going to go with 888s because another HTML color scheme says if you only give it 3 digits, it automatically doubles each one of those. So this is 2 8s for red and 2 8s for green and 2 8s for blue. That's a little shortcut for you. This is a medium dark gray. The bigger you make the numbers, remember, the closer it gets to white, because the more color you add, the closer it gets to full saturation. So if you make these bigger hexadecimal numbers, it'll become lighter. If you make it smaller, it'll become darker. I'm going to change the dark one on the top to zeros across the board, meaning no color. It's going to give me a black bar across the top, and now a gray bar underneath. And if you wanted to, you could make these, what did I say, make them bigger, so make them A's, right? Because these are hexadecimal digits. A's or B's, and it'll lighten up that bar a little bit. but I'm going to leave it with 8s. You can kind of see how dark gray it is right there. So as far as I can tell, that will get our app looking very similar to what we were used to before. And I have no rule that says that this has to be gray, and we're doing that one now up there. That has to be black and this has to be gray. You want to make them yellow and orange, or Christmas is coming red and green. I don't care. I'm just showing you how you can change them so that they look a little closer to what we have in class. That should all be described in that email that I sent you. The only thing I have not been able to figure out how to do is get the icon for my app to the left of the title. Spent a half hour trying to figure out, try different things from the web, and none of them seem to work in the emulator. What I don't have is an actual device here to see if it shows up on the actual device. Maybe it's just an emulator thing. I can't get that icon on the left to show up. If you can figure it out, I'd love to share it with everybody else. Okay. Let's go back here now. I'm going to close some of these files because I'm not going to be messing around with the colors. I'm not going to be messing around with main, because remember, the activity main simply sucks this one in. This is where your context, your data, your objects are going to come in. So I don't need the main activity, and I definitely don't need the manifest file anymore, and that should get me a little closer to home base. I also figured out a couple of things that you can do if you wanted to change the name of your project, because I asked you to copy your Unit 5, make it Unit 6, and some of you spent a fair amount of time trying to get all the 5s named into 6s or something. There is a way to do that, 4 steps. I'm not too worried about it. All I really ask you to do is change the name of the folder that contains your project so that you can tell it from one from the other. The inside, what is it called? What's its package properties? Changing those is another pain that may not be worth it. If you're interested in those, I'll try to type those up and send them out maybe tonight after I get done with the lecture. All right, let's get this ready for our sample then. And let's get some of this stuff out of the way so I can see better. I don't want this label. Pardon me, text view. So let's delete it. And now we're going to add 3 components. At the top of my screen, I want an edit text so we can type in new names for my list. Well, how do we know when to add them? We'll need a button. So I'm going to start with an edit text, a plain text view. Is that the one I want? No, sorry. I want a plain text field. Okay, there that is. Before you try to stretch it, let's add the button. So here's the button, and I want that anchored to the top right. Let's start with a button. I'm going to double click it. I'm going to change its text to add, and I'm going to give it an ID of button add. And now I think I can stretch this guy a little bit better. And then double click it and change its name to ET-add. This is my edit text for add and a button to actually do the add, and we'll go from there. I shrunk my button down a little bit. That makes the bottoms line up. You don't have to do that again. I'm not too worried about screen layout. As many of you have found, it can be very frustrating. I'll let you fight with it some other day. And finally, we want to add a list view to this layout. So I'm going to come down here, and it's under containers, I believe. Where'd it go? There it is. It's a list view. And I'm going to park it down here. And then once it's dropped, I'm going to make it fill the rest of the screen. Actually, it did it on its own. Notice that each row in the list view has an item name and a sub-item name. Next week, we'll take a look at how do we customize those rows. That'll be something I might have to add to my notes because I don't think it's in there yet, but I do have it from previous years somewhere. that we can control what appears here, we can control what appears here, and we can actually move them around. So the sub item could be out here, there could be an icon in the front, you can put anything you want on these things. Let's give the list view a name, and let's call it LST students. I just double clicked it to get at it, or you can change its ID over here, but I find it's much easier to double click it over here. One other thing while we're here is notice that a list view has multiple choice modes, just like a list box in Visual Studio. You can choose either no selection, which is just a view and scroll. Can't pick anything. Never use that. Single choice, multiple choice. Multiple choice modal, I'm not sure what that means, honestly. But we can make single choices and multiple choices from the list. For right now, let's leave this as a single choice list. And just to make sure I didn't screw anything up, I'm going to give this a quick run. Notice my list is empty, but it's there. We're going to add some stuff to the list in a little while. All right, so far so good. Don't think I'm going to need the context too much anymore, but I'll leave it there. And I now want to show you just a little bit of technique in laying out our main activity. I'm going to leave this window open because it tends to let me know how big my emulator is, so when I'm running the emulator you can still see some code. Otherwise at home I tend to collapse this down to next to nothing, but for your purposes, in case I'm typing too fast, I'm going to leave it there. Now in general I have 3 items on my form. I am probably going to want to access those 3 items. So the first thing I'm going to do at class level, and a couple of you have picked up on this from some of the examples in the book and maybe some of my examples. Every one of the widgets on the form is usually there for a reason, except maybe the labels that describe your input fields. If they're there, we're probably going to reference them, and we probably need to reference them from a couple of places. And even if we only need them from one, there's some consistency here. If we put all our widgets definitions at the top. So the first widget on the left was that edit text. So I'm going to define it. I'm going to give it the same name, ETAD. Done. You can't, I'm going to stress this again because a couple of you have done it. You cannot here say equals edit text find by ID and go find the ID. You won't get a syntax error. It'll be fine until you try to run it. And then this happens before onCreate, and it chokes because the R class hasn't been created and it can't find the objects. So you can define them at class level, but you cannot instantiate them at class level. So let's also create one for our button then. And if you abbreviate these even more and call them ET and BT because it's the only edit text on your screen and the only button on the screen, I can live with that. But I'm still not real happy living with button 1 and ET1 and those kind of things. And finally, we need our list view. I'll use LV because it's the only one. I could call it LV, or I did call it LST students, or just LV. If you give them the same names as you did form objects, it makes life a little bit easier. And at least at this stage, I think those are the only fields that I need access to. So now I'm going to start, and by the way, we could get rid of these menus. You might want to hang on to them, particularly for your Unit 7 projects, because I anticipate using those menus in the future. I might want to sort my list. I have a couple of menu items to sort it in different ways. I might want to delete items from the list. Maybe that's something I can do from there. We'll take a look at those later, but for right now I'm just going to collapse them. And then underneath on create, and I only do this because it's the method I'm working with right now, I'll put it right underneath. First thing I want to do is link. I'm going to create a new method called link, and you could call it link views or link widgets or whatever you want to call it. It's a method that I'm going to write. Instead of cluttering up on create with a bunch of stuff, I'm going to write a method called link widgets, public void link widgets. And now in here, I'm going to do all of that instantiating of my ET add, button add, list students. I'm going to define my on-click handler and all that kind of stuff. So in here, I'm going to say that ET add is equal to an edit text conversion of find an ID. And then repeat that process, and I'll pause the recording in just a minute and repeat that process for the button and for the list view. I'm going to double space them. You'll see why when we get there. The next thing I want to do is again review my favorite way now of putting in on-click handlers. The book in the last one still talks about how, or they put this embedded on-click handler, and then inside there they call a method to do all the work. It just seems a little too convoluted for me. The easiest way, I think, to create on-click handlers, and you can change when they tell you to create an on-click handler in the book assignments, you don't have to follow word by word. As long as you create the on-click handler, I don't care. The way I do it is do a button add dot set. What's the problem? Oh, it's BT add. Set the on-click listener to this. That'll give me a red light bulb. We click it and make MainActivity implement the on-click listener. To me, this is the easiest way to do this. Click. Android automatically puts the implements view on-click listener onto your class. And it says, hey, if you're going to implement that, you got to have an on-click method. Yep, give it to me. And now I have an on-click method, and I can put stuff in there. I'm going to move that a little closer to the top because I don't like all this other stuff getting in the way. The link widgets is probably a one-time bad deal. I'm going to spend most of my time in on-click. Yeah. Anyways, we can move them around. Got to move them around right. Okay. In here, I'm just as a review and also as a test, I'm going to put in here that I want to toast and make some text that applies to this, and the text is button click sensed, and I want to apply that to a long, oops, there it is, long message, and don't forget to show. It's really nice for me this semester. I've only got one language, and some of this stuff actually sticks in my head versus the rest of you poor people who got 2 or 3 that you're fighting with right now. Some of these syntax things start sticking in your head, and it's a lesson learned for all of you that it's hard right now for you because we throw 2 or 3 languages at you, all of them with slightly different syntax. and you're going like, I'm never going to remember this. I'm old. I have proof. Reed's old. He's proof. All right. That if you stick with one, a lot of this stuff that you use day in and day out sticks, and you don't have to look it up every time you turn around. That's what's slowing you down in your projects, right? Because you're looking stuff up. How did he do that in his program? Where is it in his notes? It's not in the notes. This is Sherry's pet peeve. It's not in the notes. Yeah, but it's in the recording. Oh, that helps. Where in the third recording, is that found? You can email me. I can try to remember where that stuff is. So let's just run a quick test. And this, again, is this incremental development of our program. I could write a bunch of code for onClick and then find out that my onClick isn't linked right now. It should be here, but it's wise, I think, to give it a quick test and make sure that little piece works. Okay. So my button's working. I'm happy. Making progress. We could take a break, come back next week. Let's keep rolling. Now what? The next thing we're going to need is an array list of whatever it is that we want loaded into our list view. Now in this unit, if we have time, we might try to pull this out of a database someplace, but that's probably pushing it. I'm going to hard code a list. And just like in programming logic, the first couple of programs we wrote, everything we did, as soon as the program ended, it just forgot whatever we started with. Same thing here. If we have time, we'll learn we already know how to read these out of a text file, so we could, I didn't think about that, put these names that I'm going to put in here in a text file, and then load them from a text file into an array list. We could do that. But then you also have to remember when you're done to write them back out again so that any changes you make save. Let's leave that for later and just learn how to play with list views for now. So I want an array list of strings that I'm going to call students. I'm just going to stop there at this point. I could instantiate it here. That works okay. I didn't instantiate any of these other ones, so you might get a little confused. So I'm not instantiating any of them here. I'm going to do that a little later. So after I link my widgets, now I want to fill my array. And I'm just going to tuck it right underneath here so I can see it right away. That's a public void again, fill the array. For those of you who've forgotten, I'm pressing Command-Shift-Enter or Command or Control-Shift-Enter on your Windows machines. It finishes the command for you. So about the time I type that parenthesis, I do a Command-Shift-Enter, puts in the closing parenthesis, gives me the curly brackets, puts me on the next line, so I'm ready to go. In here, I want to instantiate that array list. So I'm going to say that students is equal to a new array list. Somebody discovered along the way that you don't necessarily need to put string inside here. It kind of figures it out. So I'll leave it out. If you add it, I don't care. And then what we want to do, and this is in my notes, I found it in my expanded notes for built-in classes. We can fill this array list immediately, but it has to be filled from an array. Seems a little inside out. So now I'm going to define an array, but I'm actually going to define it inside these parentheses. I'm going to move down to the next line. Did I get rid of this guy? I don't think so. And I'm going to say, give me arrays, plural, dot, as a list. It is in my notes. It's in the expanded built-in classes because ArrayList is a built-in class. And now in here, you can put whatever you want. In this case, all kinds of strings and or integers or whatever. If you're filling this full of objects, that's a little different. I wouldn't do it if it was objects. So in here, I'm going to start typing in all your names. I'm just going to work from the front. And you can type 5, 6, 7 of them if you wish. I'm going to try to get them all in there just so you can see how the flinging, scanning stuff works. I'm even going to add people who aren't here, like Brittany. And I'm going to misspell her name on purpose. Karen, and Nathan, and Tyler, and there's 2 of you, but I don't care. Actually, you know, it's not a bad idea. Let's put both Tylers in there, but I'll separate them when I get there. Wish that would go away. Double escape got rid of it, at least temporarily. And now where am I? Kevin. And you can't keep up all this. Like I said, 5 or 6 should be fine. I just don't want to insult anybody, so I'm just going to keep cranking along here. Aaron, another Tyler, Sherry, Trevor, and let's not forget Harold, and there's another Aaron that's not here, and Lyle's not here, and where the heck is Matt today? At least he knows from recording that we missed him. Anybody else who's not here, that's what you get for not being here. That's plenty. That semicolon does not belong there. This parenthesis goes with that one. So here's the beginning parenthesis where I'm instantiating my array list. Here's its twin. It just needs a semicolon down there. This parenthesis matches up with my as list that separates the list. And in the future, if I decide to read these in from a text file, I can just delete this and read from a text file and stuff them into an array list that way. But what I want is an array list, because the array list allows me to add things, extract things a little easier than an array. And array lists, and remember our friend the ArrayAdapter that communicates with the ListView? It likes talking to array lists. So the 2 of them play well together. The last thing I want to define now is that ArrayAdapter. So let's go up here and do that. I'm going to call it, first of all, it's an ArrayAdapter class. And it's an ArrayAdapter. I think we have to say string here too. And then I'll call it ADT for adapter. If you don't like that, you want to call it the full, yeah, let's just so you know what we're talking about, adapter. Don't know if that's legal, looks good. So now I have an ArrayAdapter. And now I'm going to create one more method called set or configure or link. Yeah, let's do link the ArrayAdapter. One more method. And here I need to double check my notes. So I'll wait just a second or two. I could have run my program to make sure my fill array works, but I'd have to use a debugger to see what's going on in there. I'll keep my fingers crossed. So here it talks about the list view and some other choices we have that we're not going to take too much use of. And here's the ArrayAdapter. So we define it. Now we defined it class level. You'll see why a little later. I'm saving myself a step, and now we need to instantiate it. So when we define it, we don't need to designate its type. So let's pull that off of there. Okay. But when we instantiate it, we do. So let's study that a little longer. We're going to instantiate it, say I need a new ArrayAdapter that's going to handle strings. It's going to be linked to this activity. This is a built-in constant that says here's how I want them formatted when they show up on that list. It's a built-in constant for formatting. It is a simple list item, so it doesn't even have sub-items and things, or it might still. And then finally, fill it with what? With my array name. So that we're going to instantiate now in here. So my ADT is going to be equal to a new ArrayAdapter type string that is applied to this activity. And then we have to go into the Android constants. These are built in. Android dot, I don't even remember, I think it's R layout dot simple list. Okay, hopefully we'll get a little help here pretty soon. Dot layout dot simple. There's all kinds of things that we can pick from. Simple list item 1 is one format. These are just formats. That's all they are. So let's pick that first one because that's what we're supposed to have. And then finally, which array list do we want linked into this adapter? Students. That links my array adapter to my array. Now the final step is to link the list view to the array adapter. Does this sound vaguely familiar? Think about that grid view. We did the same thing. We linked the grid view to a binding source someplace that came out of the database, and then we linked the grid view to, the binding source to the data, to the SQL command, and then the grid view to the binding source. Same kind of concept here, sort of, except they don't call them the same stuff. Why is that red? Oh, I called it adapter. Thank you. Okay. Now back to the notes. One last step. That's it. List view name dot set the adapter to my adapter. That's not hard. I would recommend doing that right here. So my list view name is LST students dot set the adapter to my adapter. Adapter. What's wrong now? Oh, there we go. If all is well, we should now have a phone full of students. It's good spelling. What's going on? Come on. If you're stuck too, is it just mine? Oh, it's probably asking me someplace, where do you want to launch this? Missed that screen. Oh, says it's running. The other thing I still haven't figured out is once it gets running like this, how do I kill it so I can start it again without shutting all the way down? And if you just hit run again, it'll start another one. Now you have two of them sitting there stuck. I don't see a stop button up there. This one isn't lit up yet, so it's like it hasn't even started yet.
You go to run and then stop on the top.
Thank you. That's a goofy place for it. I guess I'm not supposed to stop often, which makes sense. But I don't see much. I guess I could pull it from down here as well. Nope. So let's try running it again. There we go. So now I can just drag up and down here. If I was on a phone, I could fling, and notice they're showing up in the order that I typed them. We know the button works. So now we're making progress. The next thing we're going to want to see or figure out how to do is when I click on one, what happens? Nothing. Okay, but one more thing I want to show you before we take a break. And I stumbled on this by accident. Let's go back to the adapter where we said SimpleListItem1, and let's change that to a multi. Simple multiple list. Let me just show you the difference. It's not a critical thing. Notice the checkboxes? And so now I can select multiples, right? No, because my definition of this list view still says single, but I'm displaying it using the multiple format, and so I get checkboxes. And I kind of like it because it keeps the one I've got selected highlighted. It's not required. I just kind of like it.
You can't select one.
If I want to select more than one, I have to tell the list view that I want to select more than one. The only thing we changed here is the layout, is the formatting of it. What does it look like? Instead of just a name, now it's a name and checkbox.
You can also add highlighting by doing an activated.
Doing what?
SimpleListItem activated one.
Ah, okay. So what Karen just said, just so I get it on the recording, is that we picked SimpleListItem with activated. Okay. Then it will leave that one highlighted.
It highlights it.
Okay. Good. So that's a different way to do the visual clue. But back to Tyler's question, all right, I got just enough time. I'm a little over on my recording. But if I go back to my view and double click on the list view, remember we said single choice. This we never changed, Tyler. So the list view says I'm only allowed to pick one. The formatting said, show them the formatting as if they could pick multiple, which gives me the checkbox. If you change this to multiple, and then run again, you'll be able to pick as many as you want. I hope. So lots of flexibility. Now that I've demonstrated that, we're going to go back to single. Thinking about this. I'm going to go back to single because the apps I'm going to ask you to write are just single selection apps. But I just remembered that at the end of my notes here, there's a lab. The after chapter 30 lab for you to do is to have multi-select and have it come up with a toast message telling you which ones you selected. Oh, you got all the tools. Let's see if you can put them together to create something new. That's coming. I haven't given you all the tools yet. I will. Well, let's take a break and then we'll come back to learn how to sense what's clicked and so on.